2021's Readings at Home. I'm your host, Sumitra Sundram. I do more technical writing in my work. I've recently started branching out into writing short stories, and I apologize in advance if you hear dogs barking or the sounds of construction coming from my surroundings as I'm recording this at home. Today we have a very exciting group of Malaysian writers that we'll be showcasing in this session, and we have 5 excellent writers that I am just in awe of. So our first writer that we'll be profiling will be Tunku Halim. Next will be Ram Anand. Third, Shamira N. Lin. Fourth, Sharmilla Ganesan. And fifth, Surya Tay. They will be reading excerpts from their published works. Our first writer is Tunku Halim. He has been dubbed as Asia's Stephen King, and by delving into Malay myth, legends, and folklore, his writing is often regarded as world Gothic. He has written several novels and collections of short stories, his latest being A Malaysian Restaurant in London and Scream to the Shadows. His Midnight Children trilogy for kids aged 8 to 13 was published this year. The first book is called A Vanishing, the second Cemetery House, and the final one, The Moonlight World. He wrote the first book in 2019 and the last 2 books during the first MCO last year. His first non-fiction books include A Children's History of Malaysia, a children's encyclopedia in 2013, and a biography of his late father, A Prince Called Charlie.
Hello, my name is Tunku Halim. Thank you for inviting me to readings. I have just published 3 books called The Midnight Children. One is called The Vanishing, number 2 is Cemetery House, and the third one is called The Moonlight World. They're written for children from the age of about 8 to 13. So I'm going to read just the blurb of The Midnight Children, Book 1, The Vanishing, and it goes like this. Dare you spin the bone? Can you hear it rattling in its metal box? Spooky things keep happening to Zack and Min after their father mysteriously disappears one day at breakfast. Min encounters spider-like creatures and a doll that sprints and steals. Zack is chased in a mall by a strange man who runs on all 4s, and vicious snakes trap him in his bedroom. And who is that old smelly man who gives them the box with the finger bone inside? Be warned, for much scarier oil-dripping things await them in this spine-tingling book. Don't you dare scream. So that's the blurb. And now I will read part of chapter 1 of The Vanishing. It's called Disappearing Dad. This is a family like you will never ever know or meet. They were a normal family, much like your own. They did all kinds of things together, played board games, video games, visiting relatives, went to the cinemas, and circled the bright, alluring malls. The 2 children, Min, who was 10, and her brother Zack, who was 12, were normal too. Not so different from you who are reading this. They lived in a house on a quiet street in the city. They went to school, did all kinds of activities out of school too, including ballet, netball, swimming, soccer, and karate, and sometimes argued over things that weren't at all important, but that they thought was so very important at the time. But all that changed when their father suddenly disappeared. One morning, Dad was sitting at breakfast like he usually did with a cup of coffee. He loved coffee, and he would always find a cafe at the mall to wait, while the 2 children and Mum went about the shops. At breakfast, he would always have a piece of toast and a banana. He would slice up the banana with a spoon and would arrange the slices neatly on the piece of toast. This had been Dad's breakfast for as long as Min could remember, and Min had a good memory. Once, her mother mentioned her ATM number by accident. When she forgot the number months later, Min could tell her what it was. So Min could tell everyone exactly what happened this morning. She had wandered down from her bedroom, dragging her school bag down the timber stairs and into the dining room. Good morning, Dad, Min said. Good morning, sweetie, Dad replied. Did you sleep well? Yes, I did, Dad. She kissed his cheek. He had round glasses and grey hair that curled about his ears. Min had glasses too, except they looked like small rectangles. Min went into the kitchen for a glass of water, and when she came out, Dad was gone. He wasn't there scrolling through his phone, cleaning his spectacles to the bottom of his shirt or scratching his grey hair. There was just the empty back of the gleaming wooden chair staring back at her. She thought that maybe he was in the living room, rearranging the bookshelf by the window. But when she looked, the room was empty. Perhaps he had gone to the bathroom. When Mum and Zack came downstairs not long after, he had still not returned from wherever he had gone to. Where's Dad? Mum asked, as she brought out boiled eggs and fried rice for the children. Don't know, Min answered. He was here a moment ago. They ate breakfast and chatted about school stuff. Still, Dad did not appear. There was just his cup of coffee and his half-eaten toast with banana slices and the back of the chair, still staring. It's almost time to go to school, said Mum. I'll go find Dad. Me too, said Zack. He swept back his black hair and bounded off his chair. He scurried upstairs while Mum went to check the bathroom downstairs. Dad's not in there, she said to Min, who was fiddling with a ribbon at the dining table. Why don't you have a look in the garden? But I'm eating breakfast, Min muttered. That wasn't quite the truth. She had eaten her egg and fried rice and was finishing her hot chocolate with soy milk. Mum said they were all lactose intolerant, which meant that they couldn't digest milk properly. So dairy wasn't good for them. I'll go check then, Mum huffed, irritation in her voice. When she came back, Min could see from Mum's face that she was very worried. He's not there either, she muttered. Zack then came downstairs. I looked in all the bedrooms and both bathrooms. Dad's not anywhere. Min got up from a chair. She suddenly felt worried too. Then she noticed something which she thought was very strange. Dad's dining chair hadn't been pushed out. Dad would have needed to push it out to stand up and leave the table. Min remembered returning to the dining room with a glass of water and noticing that the chair was still pushed in, but Dad was gone. She also recalled that he never pushed the chair back in unless he wasn't returning for a while. That would only happen when the meal was over. But his coffee was half drunk and his toast with banana slices lay half eaten. It was very odd. She was about to tell Mum this, but from the look on her face, she didn't want to make Mum even more worried. All three of them then searched the entire house but couldn't find Dad. In the end, Mum drove them to school. She hardly said a word, and the children knew that this meant that she was very worried. Maybe there was some sort of emergency at work, she said to them as they got out of the car. He just didn't have time to tell us. She was blinking hard, and there was a deep frown on her forehead. I'm sure that was it. The children were still worried, even when they reached their classrooms. But soon they got busy with all the things they had to do at school, thinking about timetables, test tubes, prime numbers, prepositions, paintbrushes, and PE. At the end of the day, they caught the school bus back home as usual. Where do you think Dad went this morning? Asked Zack. I don't know, said Min. We'll ask him when he comes home from work. Maybe it was an emergency, like Mum said, Zack added. Min shrugged and continued looking out the window at the cars zipping by and the buildings standing tall. When they got home, they found the front gate wide and open when it was usually closed. Other than their car, There were two other vehicles parked in the driveway. They rang the doorbell and their uncle, Mum's younger brother, let them in. Mum was on the sofa in the living room beneath a purple poster of the Eiffel Tower, wiping her tears with a tissue. Their aunt was sitting on a chair in a long dress, frowning while tapping a message into her phone. Come here, Mum called to the children when she saw them. They sat down on either side of her. Nobody knows where Dad is, she said, her voice trembling. We've looked everywhere, called everyone we know. Min began to weep. Mum hugged her. I don't want you children to worry. I'm sure there's a good explanation. Dad will turn up soon, I'm sure. Min nodded. But she wasn't so sure. Something strange was going on. She couldn't understand why the dining room chair was not pulled out. It was as if Dad had simply vanished while eating. At bedtime, he had still not come home. Both children found it hard to sleep, for they kept thinking about how and why he disappeared. Eventually, though, beneath the full glow of the full moon and to the sound of insects, they fell asleep. And that is part of chapter 1. And so that is my reading from The Midnight Children, The Vanishing. There are 3 books. It finishes, the story concludes with the final book, which is called The Moonlight World. Anyway, that's it from me. Stay safe, everyone, and thank you for listening. Do take care.
Thank you, Tunku Halim. Next, we have Ram. Ram is a Malaysian journalist, filmmaker, and author of Rainforest Unicorns, published in 2011, and the upcoming Orchids of the Rainforest, which will be published in 2021. He wrote and directed the Indian short film Dusk, and has also worked on Malaysian television episodes and stage plays. He holds an MA in film direction from Bournemouth University, UK. Ram has spent the past decade writing extensively about Malaysian affairs in various local and regional publications. He currently writes for the Straits Times. He lives in Kuala Lumpur, having conceded that he would never resolve his identity crisis as a third-generation Malaysian Telugu, and because there's no substitute for Malaysian food.
Hi, my name is Ram. I'm a Malaysian writer, journalist, and filmmaker. I've been writing for about 10 years now. My first book, The Rainforest Unicorns, was published in 2011. And this year, my second book, Orchids of the Rainforest, is about to be published by Penguin Random House. So I will be reading the first chapter of Orchids of the Rainforest. It's called Schadenfreude. So it's a short read. Thank you so much for watching. June 2018. Malaysia does not have an official summer per se, but every year the sun shows its might, the water reserves shrink in fear, and its citizens ramp up their electricity bills and air conditioning units in order to avoid breaking a sweat in their own homes, even those who can barely afford to do so. No one quite knows how long this particular season tends to last every year. Its timing is a little erratic, much like the blanket of haze that pays a recurring annual visit. But its duration has gradually prolonged. It had gone on long enough this time that the government had brought out television advertisements and larger than necessary highway billboard spaces to remind people that the country does not have an infinite supply of water. There are people who are truly oblivious to these facts, and there are those who choose not to see it or acknowledge it, especially when it means drastically changing the way they live. Geeta Rao belongs to the latter category. As she opened the sliding door to the balcony of a unit at Tropicana Heights, she noticed that copious amount of rainfall had happened while she had been soundly asleep at night. The trees on the golf course were still dripping wet, the pavements and her balcony floor were wet and slippery. Her housemate was quickly aware of the situation. She brought the in-house slippers before Geeta took a second step into the balcony. "It's slippery," Maria said in a Filipino accent. Geeta, decked in a loose t-shirt and shorts, put on the slippers, collected a morning cup of coffee from Maria's hands before turning her attention to the view from her balcony. Maria scuttled inside and returned with a pack of cigarettes and a lighter, which she placed on a small tea table on the generous third floor balcony. She smiled as she closed the sliding door, and Geeta turned around and nodded with an appreciative smile. Geeta took her phone out of her shorts pocket and placed it next to the cigarettes, glancing at the amount of WhatsApp messages that had come this morning. She swiped through all the notifications without unlocking her home screen and noticed a couple of messages from some middle class folks pointing out that the night's rainfall should ease their water concerns. Geeta knew rainfall did not immediately mean treated water for consumption, but she normally did not engage in any discussions in these groups. In fact, she did not know why she even bothered to stay in these groups. Reading all the messages and unverified forwarded videos that her neighbors, colleagues, former classmates, extended family members, and a bridesmaid drabbled in on a daily basis made her feel like she was living a more purposeful life compared to most, if not all of them. It made her feel less miserable about the fact that the only time she felt true to herself during the day was with the silence and solitude of the balcony, or the fact that she didn't feel at home in this place. In fact, she had never felt at home anywhere in her life. She placed her coffee on the small table, picked out a cigarette from the box before lighting it up. She took an inordinately long puff and exhaled out into the moist air. The rain is a gift, a sign that water reserves might recover and that the prolonged heat wave might be over, at least for this year. But it also means a traffic nightmare. Geeta realized that the traffic situation might demand a prolonged commute to work and gradually picked up a pace of smoking. Finishing the cigarette was rapidly turning from an empty-minded act to a chore she was powering through. So she abruptly dropped the half-finished butt on the balcony, darted back into the house, and reminded Maria to remove the butt before her husband got back home. Smoking a cigarette was the closest Geeta would ever come to infidelity. As she stepped into the shower, she realized she didn't know where he had been the whole night. Prakash was a surgeon, but she had always compared him to a biscuit when discussing her marriage and with her friends. He's like those chocolate chips, small, she told her cousin once, albeit with a smile, like she had never cried about it, scrolling through an old crusher's pictures. Sometimes he's around too much, sometimes I don't see him at all. Yesterday and today were the empty biscuit days. He had an extensive on-call at the hospital, slept in the doctor's restroom, and headed over for locum work. At the end of such an extensive work cycle, he gathered his team and headed over to Puchong to spend the night at one of its several dimly lit pubs. Some days he would head back home, but most days he would crash at a friend's place. Today was one of the latter. Geeta had never met this friend. She had been married to him for 5 years. She stepped out of the shower and headed for her room's oversized, overcompensated walk-in closet. She had spent 10,000 ringgit on the closet 5 years ago when they had moved into this condominium in an upmarket neighborhood. She thought it would make her feel at home. It didn't. The only attire that excited her was a white shirt, dark blazer, and dark skirt. It's what she had been wearing to work every day for the past decade. She had tried to be so many things before, but the best version of her had always been this, a lawyer. She walked to her shoebox and picked out one of the many identical-looking shoes as Maria prepared her lunch and office bag in the living room table. After 2 reruns that saw her forget her car keys and her charger, Geeta finally got into her car with everything that she would need for the day. She buckled up, turned on the ignition, and picked up her phone to finally disable the silent mode on it. Her day starts now. Before she could accelerate, her phone chimed incessantly. She noticed missed calls, messages, and WhatsApp notifications. Before she had time to check them, the phone rang again, a landline number, and she answered. As she listened to the voice on the other side of the line asking a series of ominous questions in Malay, she stared at the rain and thought about how the rain felt like a gift this morning. The rain was a gift for her, but it had not been very kind towards her husband, who had been driving through empty stretches of road at 3 in the morning. But he had also been inebriated, so she couldn't blame everything on the rain. Her husband didn't survive to see the sunrise or the blanket of his biscuit has left the building. She froze, phone still in her hands, moved her hands ever so slowly to kill the engine, and stared blankly at the dashboard. Her mind was still functioning rationally. She typed in a name on her phone's address book, albeit with shivering hands, and made a call.
Thank you, Ram, for sharing your work. Our next featured writer is Shamira Nair Lin. She is a writer from Kuala Lumpur and a recent graduate of the University of Cambridge. Dabbling in many forms of writing, she was longlisted for the 2021 Commonwealth Short Story Prize, has co-written and staged a play, is presently writing her second play, and is the co-founder of the Malaysian Poetry Writing Fortnight, an initiative aimed at revitalizing the Malaysian poetry scene. Her creative interests primarily revolve around unearthing the anti-colonial implications of ecology, music, race, identity, class, and resistance. An occasional literary critic, she has a blurb featured on Fitzcarraldo editions and a forthcoming interview with the 2021 winner of the National Poetry Award, Marvin Thompson. Her latest poetry is featured in the Almost Darurat zine, Eucalyptus and Rose Literary Magazine, and others.
Hello everyone, I am Sumitra Sundram and I'll be reading you a short story of mine titled The Excellent Vignettes. It was longlisted for the Commonwealth Short Story Prize this year. However, I will be editing it for publication and nonetheless this is the version I submitted and I'll be reading you a short excerpt from it, which is the very start of it. And to touch on briefly for context, the story is about a Malaysian girl who straddles two different spaces and two different forms of ecological imagination. And she comes to kind of consciousness and empowerment, and the story actually aims to subvert a lot of tropes in mainstream nature writing from different periods in history, Anglo nature writing to be specific. So my protagonist is written specifically for a Malaysian audience, and I hope you really enjoy this. So here we go. The first time she realized she did not have words to describe the landscape she had tumbled into, she was well into her journey at university. A frisson of excitement rolls up her spine. A child managing to sneak down to the pantry around midnight, one hand in the candy jar, the other holding on to the lid for dear life. The sweet taste of victory is worth the risk, except her watchful mother has been eyeing her futile quest in the background. The girl knows this. She persists, hoping for the best. Somewhere within, she felt the chilling reality. Learning a tongue that could never fully understand her came with a price. It was in the way she grasped at the mottled thoughts in the recesses of her mind, attempting to form smart sentences to impress her white friends. There were many phrases she had meticulously curated from an uncomfortable array of canonical white people literature, but like any other aspiring wordsmith, she took profound pride in imitating originally. Isn't that such a lively, babbling brook? What the fuck? Andrea notes, wondering why their friend felt the sudden urge to wax poetic about this familiar landscape. Mate, it's just a river, they continue, and it's not babbling. Truth be told, her first encounter with the word brook was an unfortunate one. As a 14-year-old, she typed out Brooke ruler on Google to find out more about James Brooke, the first white Raja of Sarawak. Google, in an act of kindness, altered her search to, "Did you mean Brooke ruler?" Not deeply concerned with finding out if there was indeed a brook, she would not come to know the meaning of the term in question until 5 years later, months prior to what she has mockingly dubbed as Rivergate. She laughs about Rivergate now, but at the time, nothing made sense to her. This river was nowhere near as vast as the Klang River, which runs through the heart of the Klang Valley. She grew up around the river. It was also a daily sight when she looked out the window of her classroom during mundane biology lessons. She was familiar with every nook and cranny of the river. In Malay, the word for a brook is anak sungai, a child of the river. So surely such a narrow stream of water would qualify as a brook rather than a river. Andrea thrusts their phone at her. having the courtesy to look somewhat sheepish. It was, of course, a river. When she went rambling with some of her English friends, a term to describe leisure walks in the countryside, one she hadn't been aware of until that very morning, she asked them if this was a common activity. Laura seemed mortified at the idea. Do you not go out on weekend rambles with your parents or friends back home? Well, they wouldn't stroll around in murderous heat and cloying pollution, would they? A hint of exasperation tainted her mood. Attempts to stroll around the city centre were streaked with the striking sun and humidity. Between the perpetually damp layers stuck to her skin and soaked shirts, long strolls around Kuala Lumpur were a thoroughly nauseating experience. Nauseating and exhausting. How could anyone enjoy the view when taking a stroll in the open spelled discomfort for all parties involved? It was too fucking hot. But, of course, she walked around in big spaces in a different way. Back home, she engaged in a city version of rambling within the parameters of Kuala Lumpur's famed shopping malls. Alongside Suhaila and David, they formed a sturdy alliance and turned idle ambling into a military sport. They mapped out their jalan-jalan paths with military precision. Really, they would have been the envy of the military had the military concerned itself with the activities of three teenagers from Kuala Lumpur. Their rambling routes were cooled with just the right amount of air conditioning, ruthlessly efficient with minimum effort. A 99% sweat-free experience was assured, 100% satisfaction guaranteed. Sometimes, they settled for the 8.5 minutes it took to walk from one end of Surya KLCC to the other, including time taken for 2 pit stops. However, nothing defeated the monumentally long 15-minute stretch one Utama offered. If they felt adventurous after an overpriced cup of hipster coffee from the latest trendy cafe, they made their way across every floor. From the bottom to the top, these rambles could go on for hours. They would take turns in saying, "Hey, damn tired lah, can we stop walking?" With near impeccable timing. No one stopped. At some point instead, they would naturally gravitate toward the nearest McDonald's. The thrill of a 1 ringgit vanilla sundae cone after the workout of a lifetime was one of a kind. Hours were spent indulging in idle chatter, the only sort of rambling they could enjoy. Topics such as Yuan Feng's embarrassing confrontation with Hazel at a poolside party, Daniel and Tara's incipient non-relationship, and Gossip Girl fan theories often made the rounds. No subject was off limits. Whether these walks qualify as a form of leisure is questionable. But no, Laura does not need to hear any of that. She would not get it. So thank you very much for listening to my story, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you, Shamira. Next, we have Sharmilla Ganesan, who is a radio presenter, writer, and culture critic. She was with the Star newspaper for over a decade and is currently attached to BFM 89.9. Her articles have appeared in The Atlantic, South China Morning Post, New Narrative, and Arts Equator. Sharmilla's short fiction can be found in KL Noir, Yellow, Cyberpunk, Malaysia Ramang, an anthology of ghostly tales, Bitter Root, Sweet Fruit, The Best Asian Speculative Fiction, Endings and Beginnings, The Principal Girl, and KL Noir Magic. She was also runner-up for the 2017 DK Dutt Memorial Award for Literary Excellence. Her works have been featured at the Georgetown Literary Festival and the Yoni Ki Baat Showcase in San Francisco.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sharmilla. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our readings today. I will be reading to you a short story that I wrote for an anthology called Kesa Futures, which is by Think City. And it came out just a couple of months ago. And the brief was to imagine a post-pandemic urban Malaysia. So this is my story. I hope you enjoy it. It is called, it's called The Festival Outside. They told her she was one of the last of her kind. They looked all over Kuala Lumpur before getting word of her through hazy stories and half recalled visits. And when they walked into her tiny ground floor flat, they stared at her with barely contained excitement. Are you? Yes. Oh, we thought it was just a story. No, I'm definitely real. Do you still? Oh, not really. Do you still remember? How could I forget? I did it every single day. Well, we have a proposal for you. And that was how she ended up here, under a large makeshift umbrella in the middle of Dataran Merdeka. She wondered about the others. In the early days of the first lockdown, was it 20 years ago? No, 25. Many of them had left the city, back to their kampongs. The ones left in Kuala Lumpur retreated indoors. They said it was safer like this. And what was there to do outside anyway? They couldn't work, and there was barely anyone around. Better to rest at home, stay away from the virus. Slowly, their numbers dwindled. When they restricted KL borders, those in the kampongs gave up all thought of returning. And working outside, in the thick of a crowd at high speed, was a skill you had to build. But there was no one new to train. So few wanted to do outside work anymore. So as the years slunk by, many forgot their techniques. Others grew old and eventually passed, taking their tricks and secrets with them. But now, they said KL was virus free. For this festival, they had asked her, very nicely, not to wear a mask. They wanted everyone to feel like the old days, to have fun, to go back to what it was like. A huge city-wide celebration of going back to normal. That's why they had worked so hard to find people like her, people used to the bodies and bustle of KL swirling around them 25 years ago. But what about nothing to worry about, Machi? I'm old, high risk. Trust us, no cases in KL for 2 years and no local transmissions in 5 years. Can I keep my mask with me? Can, Machi. She tried not to breathe too deeply. Being outside felt unnatural, with all this air stretching out in every direction, and she didn't know how she felt about this breeze fluttering against her cheeks and lips. Around the Dataran, a hesitant crowd was building. People still stood apart, that customary 2 meter radius. But they were there, and more were coming, many even with unmasked faces. She saw visitors gathering around the umbrellas. Beneath, others like her were busy. A little muddled and slow, perhaps, from years of no practice, but she could see a spark in them, the warmth of anticipation spread over their faces. As she worked, she felt the old familiarity creeping back into her aged fingers. There was an art to this, a certain rhythmic speed. Peel, slice, dunk, deep fry. But actually, it was all the unassuming in between moments that separated a good goreng pisang from a great goreng pisang. The banana's texture, just a touch closer to firm than soft. Its ripe, heady fragrance. Silky, thick batter chilled just enough to crisp up agreeably. Listening to the boiling oil that smothers the fritters to quieten down. Recognizing that perfect, almost translucent yellow gold at which to scoop them out. A boy, head barely higher than her table, sidled up, eyes open wide. She felt a touch of nervousness. She couldn't remember the last time someone had stood this close. She ventured a rusty smile, suddenly remembering that he could see it. He stared back at the growing pile of banana fritters on her table, mouth slightly agape. She realized he has never seen a food stall, maybe never tasted a pisang goreng either. She picked one up, offered it to him. The boy took it and tentatively bit in. She heard the muffled crunch and imagined the warm, oily sweetness spreading through his mouth. He looked up at her and stretched his lips into a big, greasy, gap-toothed smile. Terima kasih, Maci. That's it. Thank you so much for listening. And do pick up the whole anthology. I believe it's available from Think City and also for free downloads off of their website.
Thank you, Sharmilla. Our final featured writer for this session is Surya Tay, who is a novelist, essayist, screenwriter, and playwright. Born and raised in Tampin, Malaysia, Surya came to Scotland to study in the 1990s and now lives in Glasgow. Her first novel, Little Hut of Leaping Fishes, was listed for the Man Asian Literary Prize and Best Scottish Fiction and won Malaysia's Reader's Choice Award. Her second book, The Mouse-Deer Kingdom, came third in the Reader's Choice Award. Night Swimmer, the film she wrote the script for, won Best Short Film at Vendôme International Film Festival. In April 2021, she published her memoir, Unspoken, Living with Mental Illness, to raise awareness on mental health issues and to share her experiences with fellow sufferers of mental disorders. Surya Tay's work will be read by Sharon Bakar.
Hello, my name is Sharon Bakar and I will be reading from Surya Tay's memoir, Unspoken, Living with Mental Illness. I'm reading her essay entitled Unspoken, which is in fact written as a letter to her deceased mother. Unspoken. It was early November. That morning the azaleas bloomed, a brilliant red against the whitewashed walls outside the hospital ward. Inside, the last drops of the intravenous liquid still dripped along the tube that had been turned off, so that they were unable to find their way into your body. I had just walked out from the ward. The sun had risen early, already glaring. I shielded my eyes with a hand, squinting. I had forgotten how bright, how fiery the tropical sun could be. I had forgotten my dark glasses, my parasol, my sun lotion. In fact, I had forgotten many things, Mother. I had forgotten the cups of rich, steamy Milo on the breakfast table early morning to see us, the children, off to school every day. I had forgotten how you had hunched over your old singer, night after night in the dim gaslight, to conjure up one after another my day dresses, school uniforms, pajamas. I had forgotten also the peonies and chrysanthemum on my pillowcases, the fine threads of toned red and green on pale linen. I did not know then, into the cups of hot beverage, into every piece of the garments, you quietly stirred or stitched a secret in codes you would never reveal, only waiting to be decoded by us. I had forgotten too many things, Mother. I could have blamed my years of being a wanderer, of living in a cold country, the chill winds, a 14-hour flight between us, half a globe away, but could I? The truth is, I had chosen to remember instead the red swollen marks of caning on my calves, the burning sensation that seeped into my young flesh. How the mind tricks us, Mother. The memories of pain always preside over those more worthy, deeper feelings. I was young then, too young to comprehend your rage, to reason and find out the source of it. In my childish mind, I was the cause of your anger. I did not know then the culprit was the centuries-old corrupt belief of an ancient culture. Confucianism, so it is called. Those beliefs were ingrained in Grandpa, in Father, in the generations of men before them, so that it was right to them to load you down with endless chores, endless demands in voices loud and stern. And like the women of your generation and beyond, you bowed your head low and took them all in. Inside you, though, they rumbled, those orders and reprimands, growing into a resentment that would burst into fury, that would then be transferred to the cane you picked up. When I came home late from an afternoon of basketball games in school, when my clumsy hands dropped a plate, a bowl, a cup, when I was too slow in folding away the garments you'd sewn for a local shop for extra cash. Your anger shifted to me. Though the stick you lashed onto my body, it drove us apart. I had also chosen to be a wanderer, drifting away from home, away from you. It was such a delight that year when I finally left the southern town to a university on a small island in the far north. With that move, a line was irrevocably drawn between us. In a place where my past was unknown to all, I was thrilled to open the door to a different realm. New activities, new friends, new knowledge. The distance further widened with my subsequent relocations for work or studies from Penang to Kuala Lumpur and later Glasgow, a city so alien that even to have a glimpse of it in the world news was rare. My occasional letters and postcards failed to bring to life the seasons, the lochs and rivers, and to tell the stark difference between the barren bens and the dense, luxuriant tropical forests. You never had an insight into my world. Over the years, I traveled to places with people and their cultures beyond my knowledge. In Siklis, a hilltop dwelling in Nepal, I danced with villagers in a ceremony to honor the head of the village's 70th birthday. On another hilltop, this time in a remote town in Sicily, Palazzolo Acriede, I paced the street lined with volcanic stones and recollected the history and the cultures, retracing the footsteps of the Greeks, the Romans, the Arabs, the Normans, and the Spanish. Another time, in another ancient city with a culture I am originated from, I tried to visualize my ancestors' journey. I saw them trudging westwards from an inland mountainous village in the south to the port city before embarking on a turbulent ride across the South China Sea. It was then memories of the past began to resurface. I had left home long enough then. My teenage angst had long subsided. Wandering in a foreign place at times unsettled me. From one place to another, regardless where I was, something was inherently missing. I was an outsider peeping into others' houses. There was never a door to enter into. There was never another pair of eyes to look back at me. Somewhere inside me, though, I knew where I could find the gaze I longed for. My last day in Sichuan, that fated autumn, as I drifted along the paths lined with long stalks of bamboo, the news came to me. You had fallen off your wheelchair, blood clotting in your brains. It had been 7 days. That night, I sat by your bed in the hospital, watching closely as you drifted in and out of consciousness. I wanted to talk to you. I wanted to tell you I had decoded your secret. I wanted to ask if you knew mine too, but instead, I began to recite a mantra of compassion in a low murmur. You opened your eyes, and for a few moments, you gazed at me. I know, you blinked. I wrapped your hand in mine. Yes, Mother, I know too. Thank you.
We now come to the end of our Readings at Home session. Thank you to Sharon Bakar for curating the writers featured in the session, and to Parmanandam Arulandam for producing the session. Thank you also to the writers who contributed their time and creative work: Tunku Halim, Ram Anand, Shamira and Lin, Sharmilla Ganesan, and Suryate. And to all of you who joined us for this session of Readings at Home, thank you, and please keep supporting our Malaysian writers. Tune back again late next month for another session of Readings at Home. Bye for now.